Hi, it's Pastor Chris popping in with a quick reminder that if you like this video, it would be a huge help if you could share it with your friends. That will help more people see this video and find our other videos and hear the good news of Jesus Christ and get to know our community here in DeWitt a little bit better and maybe even find a community for themselves. So thank you very much for sharing what we've made here with the people who you know and love. And now, on with the video. So as Marty mentioned, this is a troubling parable. It's a problematic parable. It's a little weird and it's a little violent. And it's a little hard to preach on because of that. Luke has a perfectly good version of this parable. If you want to go outside the Bible, outside the canon, the Gospel of Thomas has a perfectly good version of this parable. A person is holding a party. And they've sent out the save the dates. Everyone's got their invitation. And when things are ready, when the decorations are up and the food is made and ready to be served and the music is going, they send out a text. They say, "The feast of God for the people of God, come, all things are now ready." And each of the people who has a save the date responds with an excuse. "I scheduled a business meeting during your party. Sorry, you can't make it. I've got a wedding to go to, and it's my third cousin twice removed, so I really have to be there. I can't make your thing. I have some friends in town, and they didn't get a save the date, so we're going to go do something else instead." So the host gets on the socials and sends it out to everyone. "Feast of God for the people of God, come, all things are now ready." And people come. Not the people who were invited or who had the save the date, but maybe a few of them. But all of these other folks show up, and they have the party anyway. And that's a good parable, because, well, we could see ourselves as the people who have the save the dates, but who sometimes make excuses to not do the thing. And there's a lesson that we can learn there. Or we can see ourselves as folks who do the thing, but are only here because some other folks decided not to do it, as the people who are having the party anyway. And there's a lesson to be learned there. But Matthew decides to tell a bit of a different parable. In Matthew's version, a king is holding a wedding feast for his son. And the king has sent out the invitations. He has sent out the save the dates. People have them. They can hold them in their hands. They know when this is. And when the time comes, when the decorations are up and the food is ready and the music is going, he sends out some of his servants, some of his slaves, some of his people to go get the invited guests. And they go out and they say, "Feast of God for the people of God, come, all things are now ready." And they're ignored. The people have all of the same excuses. So he sends out more of his servants and slaves to those people who have the invitation. "Feast of God for the people of God, come, all things are now ready." And those people grab his servants and beat them and kill them. So then, the king is angry. And he gathers his army and he sends them into the city that the king rules over, the king's city. And they find the murderers, and they kill the murderers, and they burn the city to the ground. Now, Matthew is telling this story for a reason. He's telling this parable this way for a reason. And the reason is that that Matthew is writing at a time when Judaism and Christianity haven't really separated, when Christians are just this little set of Jewish people. Well, not quite this little set of Jewish people, but this little set of people that includes Jewish people. And the Romans have recently come into Jerusalem and torn the temple down, burned it more or less to the ground. And so Matthew is saying to his Jewish friends and neighbors, hey, God sent a bunch of prophets, and we kind of mistreated them. And God sent other prophets, and we killed them. And now God's army has come in the form of the Romans and torched our stuff. And we've got to figure out a new way to do this whole thing. And we are doing this thing over here, and maybe you would like to come. That's a little problematic. That can enter into an area of Christians replacing Jews that I really don't like, that I don't think is Christian at all, that I think even Paul would be like, no. So that's still problematic, but at least we know why he's doing it. But then Matthew adds an addendum, a little post-credits scene. The king comes in to the hall where the wedding feast is being held and sees someone who is not dressed properly. And he goes over to that person. He says, hey, buddy, this is a black tie event. Where's your black tie? And the guy who he's talking to is speechless. He doesn't know what to say. So the king says, tie his hands and his feet together and throw him out into the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. The reason Matthew is saying that is, like I said, this community of Christians isn't just Jews, it's also Gentiles. And Gentiles are coming in, and they're kind of pushing out the Jewishness of it. They're saying that stuff isn't important. This is our thing now. And Matthew is saying to them, like, no, you can't do that. Those are the wedding clothes. Those are the things we have to wear. We have to be, we have to do in order for this to be what it is. In order to keep the story going. So Matthew is stuck in this spot of trying to convince his Jewish friends and neighbors of one thing and his Gentile friends and neighbors of another thing so that Christianity, as he understands it, can be this thing. This thing where the people who are supposed to show up. This thing where other people show up, and this thing where everybody agrees on what the proper attire is and where everybody is wearing it. We, of course, are a long way from then and a long way from there. So what do we do with a parable like this? While I was thinking about this scripture, this article came across my screen. It's by a guy named Keith Manns. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. And he was ordained in another denomination. Which denomination doesn't actually matter for this. But over the last few years, he saw his congregation and his denomination fall to a thing that we sometimes call white Christian nationalism. This idea that America, this whole national project of ours, exists for people like me, white, straight men who speak English as a first language and who were born here. And that everybody else needs to know their place in a system where people like me are on top. And that clothes all of that in Christian language and in Christian scripture. It is an ideology that comes in wrapped in a flag and carrying a cross. And it is incompatible with the gospel. It is contrary to what Christ was about and what we are asked to be about. So he left his church and his denomination and went into the wilderness of being trained as a chaplain. And he served in the suicide unit of a mental health hospital and then in a Tier 1 trauma hospital. And I want to read you a few paragraphs of what he wrote, because it gets at something so essential to who we are. I remember weeping with a Muslim family at the bedside of their deceased loved one, with as deep a sense of fellowship as I had over so many years with my most beloved church members. Another time I was present with a Hindu family during the death process of their elderly mother. After she died, I escorted the family to the hospital exit, and there in the dim and empty hallway of the early morning, suddenly one of her sons turned and hugged me full on, and we held each other. I believed in that moment Jesus was there between us. Admittedly, this did not happen in every meeting with every person. Some days of chaplaincy were just normal work days, and sometimes my heart remained unmoved, yet at frequent and startling moments, as I met with all sorts of people, I regularly saw flickering images of Jesus in them. These people were sent to me while I was still in the desert, and it was as if God showed me a little stream or had uncorked within me an overflowing fountain. I found myself lavishly distributing Jesus in ways that were outside the limits of my church teachings and practices. I splashed water for baptisms in ways that stretched and broke my previous definitions. I rummaged around staff break rooms for crackers and sugary grape juice, offering these bargain basement elements as holy sacraments to people with only the slightest impulse of faith. I helped organize spiritual rituals for people of completely other faiths. I flung God's love around like the wild sower in Jesus' parable, trusting that God would grow things anywhere God wanted. I saw that so many of these people were like seeds trampled underfoot, already stripped and beaten by hell. It anguished my heart to see, especially that many of my suicidal patients had been abandoned, cast out, and rejected by harsh authoritarian and law-based religions of all sorts. In those moments, it came down to this. Here the water. Here the saltine cracker and the grape juice, the gifts of God for the people of God, for any humble, suffering, desirous soul. Oil and wine for their wounds. My hands, my heart promptly offered up and touching the flesh of humanity. On the suicide unit and in the hospital, I encountered people from many expressions of Christianity. I observed that the hyper-religious, loud-mouthed people who proclaimed themselves to have mighty faith, patriotic morals, and essential truth actually possessed only distortions and twisted imitations of Christianity. On a few occasions, their faith manifested as something resembling mental illness. In vivid contrast, the simple, pure, rugged presence of Jesus was evident in the weakest and humblest of human beings. What Keith found in his work was Christ. What Keith found in his work was love. And love is the wedding garment that we are asked to put on. And I need to be careful here because I know when I say that, that can sound a little cute. That can sound a little woo. That can sound a little, aw. But when I say love, I mean the kind of love that draws Christ to lay aside glory and come into the world as one of us and go to the cross and the tomb. We are called to love with that ferocity of love. We are called to love God with that ferocity of love, with all of our heart and all of our mind and all of our soul and everything that we are. And we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves, which means we are called to love our neighbor and to love ourselves. And that all is hard enough. But then we are called to love strangers. People on the other side of town, or on the other side of the state, or on the other side of the country, or on the other side of the world. People who we will never meet. People who we can never understand. And then we are called to love enemies. People who look at us with hatred, who would spit bile at us, who would just as soon see us die. With that ferocity of love. If I check the box that says Christian and do not have love, that's just a smudge on a piece of paper. If I show up to every Saturday night service and every Sunday morning service, if I volunteer on every committee and for every volunteer opportunity, if I go on each and every mission trip and do not have love, that is wasted time. If I speak with the tongues of angels, if I can recite every verse of Scripture and more besides, if I can speak prophecies as yet unheard and unheeded and do not have love, that's a clanging gong and a clashing cymbal and an out-of-tune piano and a drummer who cannot find the beat. It is about love. It is not about checking the box that says Christian, even though that can be important. It is not about showing up to church, even though that is important. Please continue doing it. It is not about adding scripture to things or carving crosses on stuff. It is about love. And if Matthew can add an addendum, if he can put a little post-credit scene, so can I. So let's move Matthew's post-credit scene to a mid-credit scene, right after the splashy stars, but before the key grip and best boy. And let's put another scene after the AFL-CIO and Teamsters Union logos have crawled up the screen. Because I really want to believe that in that moment where the king was tossing the guy out, the guy found his voice and said, "Of course I'm not wearing a black tie. I came in off the streets. I'm not ready. I can't do this on my own." Because we can't do this on our own. We are called to love with the ferocity of love, a ferocity of love that we have never experienced, that we have never been able to do, and we are always going to fall short. We are relying on the grace of God to see where we have tried and to pull us along even more, to forgive us where we fail. And so the guy can say, "I messed up. I wasn't ready. I couldn't do this, but you can do this for me. Give me the clothes. Give me the tie and the jacket. Give me a vest and a cummerbund. Clothe me in love, and I will be yours." And I want to believe that the king in that moment reached down and untied the man himself and gave him the love he so desperately craved, lifted him up, and led him to the dance floor where he could enjoy the party, the feast of God for the people of God, which is everyone. Thanks be to God.